Welcome back to my garden. Last week I went to the opening of an art exhibition which I'm involved in. It was very exciting. It's always nice to get out and it's nice to see your work up in the gallery space walls with other artists, meet them and so forth. It was a really enjoyable evening at a nearby town's gastronomic festival. They have an associated art event. And part of this was a lot of the normal sort of speechifying. There was a distinguished guest who was making comments, walking around, looking at the art and talking about it to the gathered public, a sort of important local official. And I knew his name from before. Reasons that will become clear. I'm not going to go into too many specifics here. But at any rate, I'd heard about him before, sort of idle gossip, and he wasn't at all what I'd imagined he would look like. What do I mean by that? Well, I guess based on the gossip that I'd heard about him, I sort of pictured him as a kind of a figure involved in, shall we say, corrupt local government practices. Of course, I have no reason to say that is true, that he is corrupt or indulges in illegal activities, but I sort of imagined him as the kind of person who wasn't in local politics for reasons of public service, but to feather his own nest. Let's put it that way. I'd been led to believe that. Now, what would someone like that look like? I hear you ask. It's hard to say. But the gentleman I saw wasn't what I'd imagined in my mind's eye. And so I started wondering, what did I envision him being? And it struck me that I had sort of, whilst not painting a very vivid picture, it was something from the movies. Either some sort of mafia figure, wearing a white linen suit, looking very patrician, with a dapper hat, but not a friendly face. Or perhaps I pictured him looking like one of those, and now this is a dreadful stereotype, but one of those border police officers in some sort of a cheesy American Western, a gentleman with an enormous black moustache, greasy hair, a bit sweaty, a uniform that's too tight for his somewhat overweight body. And I know these are pitiful stereotypes. They go well beyond simply story tropes that are commonly dished out by Hollywood. They are the sort of prejudicial stereotyping that we should avoid. And all the same, it was interesting that in my mind, the gentleman speaking about the art, who looked like a kind of down-to-earth university professor, whatever that might mean, he certainly didn't look like the person I'd imagined. Now, I don't know if you have felt this before yourselves, where you've heard someone's voice on the telephone, or perhaps you've seen a list of names of lecturers when you're at university, and then when you walk into the first meeting, the person isn't anything like you'd imagined them to be. And of course, what you've done is you've based things on, I suppose, one of two sorts of imaginings, let's call it that. Either you have an enormous amount of experience with the type of person in a particular, that fits the bill in the particular area that you're imagining. Or you're basing it on visual stereotypes, crude visual stereotypes. And where better to get those kind of crude visual stereotypes than the media that we consume, be it something factual, the news, or films and TV. And perhaps these are probably habits that we should try to avoid. But I'd started thinking about that because of this sort of strange feeling that the gentleman didn't look anything like I'd expected him to look. I certainly don't have an enormous amount of experience with local government corruption, or corruption of any sort. And I can say that quite honestly. Say, not terribly much, but I do actually have some. Most of my short list of anecdotes can trace back to my time in Peru, and don't go down any stereotypical road there. It's just because that was the time of my life when I had business engagement with a local municipality, because I was with friends starting a business. One of the requirements of the license that the local municipality gave was that we had to have a certain number of parking spots. And it was obviously from the point of view of the premises, the business premise, that we had premises. Dear oh dear, that was a bit of a brain freeze. Anyway, we'd rented a place, and it was quite obvious that it only had 2 parking spots, and they'd said they're willing to give us a license if we had 6 parking spots. And very conveniently, they had just given building permission for a new underground car park in the traffic circle next door to where we were going to locate our bar. How convenient that they would then ask us for a fixed number of parking spots. Or maybe it was just the sort of thing that bylaws require. I don't know. You be the judge. At any rate, there was absolutely no way that we could afford on our budget to buy 4 parking spots. But luckily, when we went to make those inquiries, the gentleman, the manager that was involved in that area, said that, well, we could buy a certificate for 4 parking spots as long as we agreed not to use them, and that certificate would cost $600 in cash. Now, obviously that's corruption. And this gentleman certainly didn't look like some kind of Wild West border policeman, or a Sicilian gentleman with family connections. Just looked like an ordinary person, and he'd seen a business opportunity, so to speak. I was actually, that's not the full extent of my experience of Peruvian corruption. I think everyone who lived there, local or foreign, would have run-ins with the local police force, sort of in traffic-related areas. I remember one Christmas, a friend was giving me a lift back from the bar in his Mercedes. He'd had more than the legal limit of whiskies, there's no denying that. And he was stopped by a police officer. And I can remember the conversation when he handed over his driver's license, just before it, handing over the driver's license, which had a discreet $20 bill nestled in it. He asked the question, isn't it wonderful? It's Christmas time, we were coming back from an office celebration. Perhaps you have the same. would it be possible to make a contribution? So, you know, this kind of story really was very, very common. And, you know, far be it for me to make judgments of the corruptibility of a Peruvian police officer, but it was all too frequent, these stories. But I digress. Quite a long digression. I mean, I could tell you some more stories. The classic of the headmaster once upon a time of Markham College, a very well-to-do private boys' school in Lima. Mr. Pinchbeck, what a delightfully Dickensian sort of name. And there was a story about him where he'd been stopped by a police officer. And as the inquiry unfolded, he asked the officer, "Young man, do you have a mother?" And the police officer was kind of completely shocked. He'd never been asked this in this particular type of dialogue. And he said, well, yes, I do. "And does your mother like ice cream?" And the police officer said, "Well, yeah." To which Mr. Pinchbeck allegedly said, "Well," as he handed over a cheerful dollar bill, multiple denomination, "well then, buy her an ice cream and stop bothering me." I always like that story, whether it's true or not. Anyway, the digression's continuing. What has this got to do with all of this? Well, it struck me, with all of us. It struck me while I was thinking about this ridiculous stereotyping that my mind had subconsciously been involved with. Well, if we do this about other people, we do this with ourselves, and I guess we must. We tell ourselves stories based on flimsy cues, on media, on the local culture, on belief systems that have absolutely no validity, on extrapolations of the media or whatever experience has dealt us. We tell ourselves these stories about ourselves and draw equally ridiculous conclusions about how we are. And I think that's probably very true for most, if not all of us. That there is some kind of imagined version of me that I have cobbled together in great colourful detail that really bears no connection to what might in some sense be true or not. And that's what I was thinking about when I was listening to, or not listening to, what the gentleman from the local council was saying as he warbled on. Frankly, I couldn't actually make it out. I was sort of standing in the back row, and there are a lot of people, and there was a lot of noise. So there we are. That's it for this week. Perhaps this will be the start of an investigation into the stories we tell ourselves. Perhaps not. If you think it's a good idea, let me know in the comments below. Otherwise, as always, I trust your life is filled with joy. And until next week, from sunny Brazil, ciao.